I had so much fun creating greeting cards from my masterboards that I decided to show you today how I created the blue ones. Hi, I'm Christine, the artist behind our Alyssa Designs, and I'm happy you're here. Welcome. Today I'm going to use the masterboard that I created on Monday to cut up and create greeting cards to put in my painted tree booth. And as you can see, I've already created quite a few. This is one masterboard that I'm not sure if I did this one on camera, but I really love these. I love the shimmer of the gold that I put on top. So I have those, and then I have another set, and these I did differently. These, I really love the black, and I love the outline around the edge. It kind of makes it look like an old photo, and I did those on a masterboard that I did collage on. The first one and this one that I'm working on now just has paint. So I use paint, stencils, and then in the end, the scribbles with the pen. So I'm just going to cut these down, and I believe the measurements here were 4 3/4 by 3.5, and they're going on, I believe they are 5 by 6 cards. I have different sizes, but these are going on the 5 by 6 cards, so you don't have to cut it perfectly. This, what do you call this, a guillotine? This cutter is so frustrating. I love it, but it pulls the paper sometimes, so you really have to hold it hard. You can use a ruler and an X-Acto knife, or just draw a light line and cut it with scissors if you want it super accurate, but I've learned how to keep this pretty straight. I have times where there's usually one strip in each batch that I can't use for cards because it's crooked, but anyway, you just cut them down as closely as you can. They don't have to be perfect. And then I use the smallest corner rounder to just round the corners of each one. And this corner rounder that you see me using in this video it's okay. I will put the link in the description for the one that I'm using if it's still available on Amazon. My favorite one is from Creative Memories, and I have the corner rounder, although it's just one, and I don't believe it has the smallest setting like I'm using here. That's why I'm using this one. That's pretty good. There's 3 different sizes, and I just think that it helps them look a little bit more finished. Sometimes I like the squared corner, but in this case I like the way these look rounded. And I'm just kind of looking to see which side of the card is going to look best and cut off the more boring side. And that little scrap piece that gets cut off won't stay boring for long because they'll become tags, belly bands, journaling cards for my journals, or whatever, ephemera for my ephemera box, of course, whatever I decide to create with them. So when I cut all those little pieces off, I have a whole drawer full of little pieces of masterboard that didn't make the cut. Of course, I will make a video of all of those pieces being turned into something else, and maybe you'll recognize the masterboards when I do that. Once they're all cut, I just go back and remeasure them, and if I need to take a little bit off so that they're all closer to the same size, then that's when I do that, and then go back and round all the corners and get them ready for the next step. This is one of my favorite steps in the process because it's weird how you look at a giant masterboard and it looks like a lot of stuff on a page, and the details look small in relation to the full page. But then when you look at them cut down like this, they look completely different. It's so fun to look at them and see all those pieces that you cut away from the rest of it and how it changes the look of each detail. I don't know, I hope it makes sense, but you'll see when you cut up a large masterboard into small pieces how cool the small pieces are individually. So I'm just gathering my paint and my brush, and a little to-go container is my favorite thing to use for stenciling because it's flat and I can really spread the paint out and keep my brush somewhat dry. Although you'll see in a couple of minutes that I realized that's not how I did the stenciling on these cards before. I used a sponge. I don't know what you call those. The little sponge with the wood handle. A stamper? A blender? I don't know. But I decided to switch it up and not use this stencil brush for these, because when your sponge dries out, you can use this stencil brush and then do a circular motion and make it nice and smooth. But I remembered at this point, while I'm trying to put this down, because when you use the stencil brush, it puts the paint on really super thin, and there's not really a lot of texture to it, and the paint is not as, it doesn't cover as well. So then I remembered that I used this stamping sponge tool thing. And if you stamp it and then get most of that paint evenly distributed in the sponge and tap it like this, it starts to dry as you're putting the paint down. And the slower you go, the better this effect is. But what happens is it starts to get a little bit sticky. So you're really layering on that paint. So you only need really one layer. And you get this beautiful velvety kind of look because you're getting bubbles and it's starting to dry. I don't know how to explain it, but you can see it here. There's so much texture in that palm tree. And when I went to show Bob the previous sets, he asked if it was velvet, and that's what made it click for me. I thought, wow, it really does, and I love that. And that's why when I started out with the stencil brush and saw what it was doing, I thought, wait a minute, this is not what I did before. So I switched it up, got this sponge out, and I just love the way it gives that velvety texture. So you'll have to play around with it and try it out. But you do want to keep the paint not thick, but not thin down either. So you won't see me use my spray bottle of water very often when I'm doing it this way. And then I go back and just highlight those edges a little bit, or low light, however, like the black ones I did, whatever you decide to do with your design. And another thing that I thought about with the stencil brush, this stencil that I created using my wood burning tool and acetate is very delicate. And if you're going to wash these in between with some soap and hot water, sometimes you can use alcohol if you're going to clean it right away and it'll just come right off of that stencil. But a lot of times I'll just throw them in a little container of water while I'm working. Sometimes I use a little bit of soap in there just to start soaking it ahead of time. That's fine, but I washed this one after the black ones because the paint started getting really thick and my water got too hot. So there's little pieces towards the center of the palm tree that are really fine and they're curled up a little bit. So it's very difficult to use the stencil brush when that happens. And when you're using this little stamper tool, I don't even have to glue anything down or use any temporary adhesive because you're going straight down on it and it'll push those little pieces down. And as you can see, I get some pretty clean stencils. There's a few spots that the paint gets under there, but as long as you keep it somewhat dry, the sponge, and stamp directly up and down, I haven't had any problems and they come out pretty good. Now, if you noticed, I took out some of that gold paint because I love the way the light catches and it doesn't really change the color at all. I wanted the palm tree to stay flat and velvety, but on some of the cards you couldn't really, there wasn't enough contrast between the background and the palm tree. So my first attempt at trying to get them to stand out was to put that shimmer in with the flat antique white paint, which helped in some cases. But as you can see up to the top left in that card sitting on top of the stack, the starburst that I added to my masterboard also had that shimmer on it. So some of these palm trees did not show up well, but I will fix that as we move forward. And I think you're going to like what happened. Totally different look than what I was going for, but you shall see soon what I did. Okay, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit. I didn't want to take too much out because I want you to see how I do each one of these. They're not all the same, and I'm kind of troubleshooting as I go. Some of these you'll see, this is the one, it just did not show up at all. I mean, it kind of did, but there's not enough contrast there. So you'll see me going over it. And yes, you can do second layers with the stencil, but it's a bit tricky to get it all lined up again. But the cool thing about going back and putting the stencil back over something that you've already done is sometimes you can offset it a little bit and get a nice little hint of a shadow on one side or a hint of a highlight, and it's kind of a cool effect. So that's what you learn when you do these over and over and over again. You learn little tips and tricks and fun things along the way. Fun fact about me, if you're interested, but it might be helpful to you. A lot of times in the morning, I watch a podcast on YouTube, and it's called The Mindset Mentor. And this morning's video was about, well, it's actually from about 6 months ago, but it was this morning for me. And it was about the consistency secret and how when you do repetitive things, after a while, you start to master them. And I think that applies to these Masterboards and creating these cards over and over and over again, because you really learn a lot of cool tips and tricks and effects and things that you love that you want to start repeating over and over again in your art, and things that cut down on time and make you more efficient. But I think that that's how you create your style. So in the beginning, I looked at other artists, and of course we always compare ourselves to everyone else and what they're doing, and you think, oh my gosh, how do they have the imagination to create these beautiful things, and why don't I have that, and how do I get it? So if you're feeling like you'll never be able to create art like another artist, which you won't exactly, but you can get to a point where your past you can look at your future you and say, wow, how did I get there? Well, you get there by doing little things like this consistently over and over and over again. And that's not exactly the message from today's podcast, but that's kind of what I can take away from the podcast and apply to this particular project. Now, in the podcast, he's talking about doing things consistently in little bits every single day, every day, over and over again, the same thing. And it compounds over time as you master it, and that's what brings you success. But when I listen to podcasts like that, I try and apply it to what I'm doing at the time, and there's so many messages in them. I love listening to motivational speakers, and sometimes I don't agree, but there's always something you can learn, and I think it's important to do something positive in the morning to set yourself up for the day. So while I'm at the beginning stages of my art career, I think it's easier for me to see now that doing things over and over again and being mindful of what you're doing and try and learn from everything, like how the paint soaks into the type of paper that you're using or how one color blends with another. It all becomes part of the process and the path that leads you to your own specific style. There's so many different combinations of things that you can do, and once you get that routine and continue using your favorite little bits of knowledge and put them all together, you will eventually become that artist that you stood there in awe of and wondered how you would get there. I'm not there yet, but it's nice to kind of come to these realizations and say, okay, all right, so it's not a switch that you flick on or some kind of DNA that you have to tap into from a ancestor that was highly creative in your past. It's practice and learning and deciding what you love and what you don't love, and doing it over and over again and creating your step-by-step process. Not that you can't veer from that path and experiment and learn new things, but there's hope, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If you haven't already noticed, I decided to add some of that teal on top of some of the cards. A lot of times I like to try and make these in batches, and I want them all to be the same. But sometimes with Masterboards, because you're using different colors and different shades all over the board, it just does not work out. So you have to change it up a little bit and try some new things. And I really love the way these came out with the blue. And it's mixed in with a little bit of the shimmer. But then I still had areas where some of the palm fronds blended into the background too much. So I decided to do just the edges on those areas. And I love blended colors. So this was the happiest accident. And like I said before, when you're developing your style and the techniques that you learn mostly by accident, sometimes by watching other YouTube artists, I hope I inspire you to try some things that you haven't thought of to try yet. But sometimes it happens by accident like this. And this is definitely something that I will end up doing more often when I'm using stencils, because I'm really happy with the way these came out. And it's so fun to blend the colors, and that each one came out. While I like things to all be the same, I do love that these cards came out a little bit different. My intention was to make a soft pastel Palm Beach style card with the antique white palm trees on top, like the first ones that I did, which I'll show you again in a little while. But these came out more retro, especially the one on the top up there that has the lines through it. Very 80s. At least to me, it just kind of takes me back to that neon 80s with the stripes, but I really like them. They're cool. I mean, I'm an 80s baby. I was born in 1970, so I had my teenage years in the 80s, and it was kind of, I was laughing. It was a cool, I will try and go back and do that soft Palm Beachy look, but I'm super happy with these. I love them. I wish there were a little more contrast, but I do really love how they came out. I'm thinking that if I do this again and I have a bright background like this and I'm doing the palm trees in similar colors, it might be kind of cool to go into the center of the card where I'm going to place the palm tree and do a highlight or a low light if I'm using bright colors, and kind of shadow the area where I'm going to place the palm tree to tone down that background. So that is something I'm going to try on a future set of cards. And quick tip, when you have ideas like that, especially me, because I have terrible brain fog and I'll completely forget, I keep a really cheap lined journal close by, and it's labeled ideas. And it's hardcover, and there's a reason for that, because it will get wet and painty. So you don't have to have a hardcover, but I decided a while back through trial and error and quite a few accidents that my book needs to be hardcover if it's going to be sitting around the projects that I'm doing. But I just jot my ideas or sketches down, and then it's always fun to go back and look and see what I have forgotten about that I want to try. And also important is to reference the project that you were working on when you had that light bulb moment and jotted it down in your book. It's easy for me because I have the YouTube videos that I can write down and refer to, but if you can, try and write down what you were working on, because trust me, later it will help to make a lot more sense. Back to what we're doing, and up until this point, everything's pretty self-explanatory, which is why I didn't tell you step by step. I just fixed the shading on the palm trees to make them stand out more. And now I'm cutting some deli paper into quarters to put in between the cards, because they're not quite dry yet, and this will keep them from sticking. So you want to put the waxy side down, and as you can see, I like to get my fingers in there. I overkill. So you might not need this much glue, but the most important part, I think for me, because I like the piece that I'm gluing down to be completely flat and no corners kind of curling up later. The most important part is getting that glue all the way to the edge. And then I'm using my brayer just to roll it out for a few seconds while the glue's starting to set up. And then I stick it under a heavy book, which in this case happens to be an old economics book that was Bob's from high school. So I don't know, maybe we're going to have people come to the front door to collect this book. I'm sure he's old, so I'm sure it's way out of date at this point. I don't know how he ended up with it, but it's one of my favorite books to weigh things down and flatten things out. Although, when I'm done, you should take them out and kind of spread them out a little bit so all this glue dries properly. And by the way, he's only a year older than me, so I'm not being mean. I'm just as old as he is. So that's pretty much it. I just continue to glue all these down, and I was thinking about putting gold leaf coconuts on these cards. However, we're trying to make quick cards that are easy to make and either give away or sell. So I may or may not go back and do that. I probably won't. I'll probably save that for another project, but it'll definitely go in my idea book. Here's the fun part where you get to go back and look at everything that you've created, and really, sometimes I don't even look at what I'm doing closely when I'm doing something repetitive. So it's always fun to go back and really inspect each card or each piece, whatever it is that you're creating, and see all the details in the card. I really love how these came out. I'm not sure if I'll use the star on the next one. I don't know whether it's because I didn't tone it down in the background so that the palm tree would stand out more. Maybe that's something I could play around with, or just not use the star at all. I really love it, but it did present a problem, which is what led me to add those darker colors and do some of that shading, which, not a bad thing. It was an interesting twist on what I was doing, a shift in my plan, but it did lead me to the final product that was not what I envisioned when I started. So I love these, but I still want to try again and use what I learned to create the cards that I was thinking of when I started. These turned out a little bit more like the black ones, which I'll show you here in a moment. And what I was going for was more like the pink and coral and antique white ones that I created, and I'll also show you those. So far with this pattern, I've created 3 sets of cards. So 3 Masterboards and 3 stacks of cards, all the same in a different way. I love them. They're fun to do. They're not boring because the background is different. So you get a different outcome every time. As you can see, they're so cool. This one is a Masterboard that I used to create using just scraps. So I have some of my paper that I use to protect my space, which sometimes I use and sometimes I don't. I have some Valentine's paper in here you might recognize. So it was just one of those Masterboards that I wanted to gather up and use up all my scraps and create a background. So none of it went to waste, and it's fun to recognize them in the completed pieces. And then in this one, that paper in the middle, this is one of my favorites because it looks like the ocean behind the palm tree, and it's because I used paper that I dyed in the backyard, like a long strip of Amazon packing paper. So I'll be using some of that paper to create that ocean background again. It was written down in my idea book. And this is the set that I was originally wanting to replicate only in the blues, which I was somewhat successful, but not quite. I'll be trying this again. Now, if you're interested in taking your artwork like this when it's completed and allowing it to work for you more in the future, check out my Tuesday tips from this week. And I'll also be doing a long form showing how I take photos of these, edit them, and then upload them to my Redbubble site. I love Redbubble. It's kind of a lower end. I have Printful and Printify connected to my website, and I think their products are a little bit better quality. However, Redbubble is a really quick and easy way to upload your artwork and test it out on different products and also see what people are most interested in. It's a good way to know which products you should take your time placing on your website. So if you want to see that, or you just appreciated the project today and this video, please like and subscribe and come back for more. I really appreciate your support, and I will see you on Monday for Masterboard Monday. I hope you all have a very creative weekend. Thanks for watching.